Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Nations. Nations is a card-driven civilization building game. Let's jump right in with a description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks. This is Nations set up for a two-player game. First, you're randomly going to choose which player goes first. In our case, it's the red player, so he's going to put his marker on the one space of the player order track, and green's going to go in the second. Also, the first player is going to start with one book, while all other players are going to start with one additional book. So second player will be 2, then 3, then 4, and so on if you're more players. The next thing players have to decide is their difficulty level. In our case, we're both going to play on the Chieftain difficulty, which is the easiest. Goes all the way up to Emperor, which is the hardest. Aside from that, each player is going to put a marker on the 0 space of the military track and the 0 space of the stability track. Also, the black war marker is going to go in the war space, and the white round marker is going to go in the first A in Age 1. Next, players have to decide if they're going to use the A sides or the B sides. The A sides are all identical, so it doesn't matter which board player takes. So for instance, Greece and Rome here are exactly the same because they're both the A sides. But if you take the B sides, like here we have the Egypt B side, you'll see it looks a little bit different. It doesn't start with an axeman at all, and he already has the pyramids built, and they start with some different resource counts here. So if you choose to use the B sides, which are all a little bit different, you're going to draft them in reverse player order. But if you're picking the A sides or the B sides, doesn't matter. You're just going to take all the resources as listed on the board. In our case, it's 3 food, 6 stone, 6 money, 7 victory points, and 5 workers. Then you're just going to shuffle up the event and progress cards by age. There's going to be 4 stacks of each, age 1 through 4. And then you're going to fill the progress board as indicated by the age 1 progress cards based on the number of players. We're 2 players, so we only use these columns here. But once you get to 3 players, 4 players, and 5 players, you would put more cards out. I also want to point out there's some advanced and expert cards that have little symbols on them in the corner like that they recommend you take out for your first game, but for our purposes here, they're all included. From here, just form a pool of resources and you're ready to start the game. The game is played over 8 rounds composed of 3 phases, which are maintenance, actions, and resolution. After every second round, a scoring phase will occur, which you can see on the round track here. After the 4th scoring, there's a final scoring, and whoever has the most points at that time is the winner. So each round begins with the maintenance phase, which is composed of 5 parts, which are round marker, progress cards, growth, new events, and architects. First thing you're going to do, except not in the first round of the game, is you're just going to advance the round marker to the next lettered space. Also skipped during the first round of the game is refilling the progress board. Normally what you're going to do is you're going to wipe out all the cards still in rows 1 and 2, which you can see 1 and 2 here. But any cards still left in 3 will come down to 1, and you're just going to refill based on the number of players. So for 2 players, we're only ever going to use these columns here. But with 3, 4, 5, you would refill accordingly. Next, in reverse player order, players are either going to increase their population or gain resources. If you choose to increase your population, you can take from either side. You can take from the food side or the stability side of your area. You're just going to add that guy in. You can always take as long as there's a guy there, so theoretically you could take all 4 of these guys before ever taking one from the opposite side. For all game purposes, if anything is in a square, which is going to be military and stability, it immediately resolves. So if you took a guy from this side, for instance, you're immediately going to lose 3 stability. However, anything with a circle, such as food here, that you lose, you're not going to lose at that time. It's only going to resolve during the production phase later in the turn. If instead of growing your population you choose to gain resources, you can gain either stone, gold, or wheat. You have to pick one, but you're going to gain as many as your difficulty level indicates. So in Chieftain we would gain 4 of the 1 resource, but if you're playing on Emperor, you would only gain 1 of that resource. After all players have increased their population or gained resources, you're going to reveal the top event deck of the current age. Of course, we're in age 1 at this time. It's going to be put here. Then we're going to add architects based on the number of players and based on the card we just played. We can see in a 2-player game, we always add 1 architect, so 1 is going to go here. However, the event card will also add some. This event card added none, but you can see here in the deck, some of them will add 2 or a 1 or things like that. So this turn, we would only have 1 architect. I also want to point out that before you do this each turn, you wipe out all remaining architects. So if nobody ever took this architect the first round, he would be wiped out, and this would be refilled following the same pattern the next round. So again, it would add 1 because it would be 2 players, but then another 1 because of this event card. When the maintenance phase is complete, we move on to the action phase, which is the meat of the game. Players are going to alternate turns, taking 1 action or passing, but once a player passes, they're totally out of the round. They can take no more actions. The 3 options a player has is to buy a progress card, to deploy a worker to their personal board, or to hire an architect. If you choose to buy a progress card, you're going to pay gold equal to the row. You can see this row costs 1, this row costs 2, and this row costs 3 gold. Then you're going to immediately resolve the card. Different types of cards are going to resolve differently, and we're going to go over each right now. The first type is buildings and military, and they are blue and red respectively, and when you take one of these, you're immediately going to put it on your board, covering up one that's already shown. You start with these pre-existing ones here, but when you cover them up, they're totally gone. If you had any guys on the other one, they would be wiped out. So for instance, if we put this here, these 2 guys would now be undeployed. You can cover red with blue and blue with red. It doesn't matter. Just you're limited to the amount of spaces on your player board here. The next type is colonies, which are these green ones. For colonies, you need to have a certain military value. You can see here you need to have at least 3 military to get this, but when you get it, it's just going to go in one of your colony spaces of your board. You are limited to the amount of colony spaces you have. You can see both the A sides are limited to 2 apiece. If you already have 2 colonies and you get another one, you just got to discard one and replace it with the new one that you've gotten. If later you ever go below the military value, it doesn't matter. You only had to have that military value when you conquered the colony. It's okay if you go below, you never lose the colony for that. Next are wonders, which are just going to go in the wonders under construction space of your board. If you already have a wonder under construction, you're going to have to discard it at that time. You can only have 1 wonder under construction at any given time. It's also important to note if you had any architects on a wonder that you discarded because you took another wonder under construction, they would be lost at this time. Another type is an advisor, which is orange in color, and they're just going to go in the advisor space of your board. All civilizations are limited to 1 advisor, so if you ever have one, you take another. You're just going to discard it, and they give you a special effect that essentially works at all times. Next are the Golden Age cards, which are yellow. They give you a choice. You can either take resources, see here will be 2 stone, or you can pay a certain number of resources to get a point. And that's how that card works there. So you just resolve it and then discard it. After that, we've got battles, and battles are gray. You can see a couple here. You're just going to choose 1 resource type shown, either books, food, or stone here, and you're going to get as many as your raid value. So a raid value is on every military card here. You can see this one has a raid value of 2, this one has a raid value of 4. The way you obtain a raid value is you have to have at least 1 guy on it. So if you have 1 guy on this, you have a raid value of 2. If you have 3 guys on it, you still have a raid value of 2. It doesn't go any higher. If you have multiple places, so for instance, you also had this archer, you have a raid value of 2 here and a raid value of 4 here. They do not add together. You would just have a raid value of 4. So you'd pick what you wanted, you would take 4 of that type, because that is your raid value. And after that is wars. Wars are the final card type, and they are black in color. When you take a war, you're immediately going to mark on this track here what your military value was. So let's pretend both players had military values like so, and let's say the red player bought this war. He's immediately going to mark here on the 5 space that that was the value of the war. Only 1 war can be bought per turn, so later even if green or red wanted to buy another war, if there was one out here, they couldn't because 1 was already bought this turn. Also, I want to point out if red's military value goes down or up during the turn, the military war value is going to stay exactly where it is. It does not move once bought. So those are all the types of progress cards you can buy and how they work. The next possible action you could take is to deploy a worker. When you deploy a worker, you take one of your workers that you already have, not from this group here, just from the group that already exists, and you put them on one of your buildings by paying the stone cost. You can see all the pre-existing buildings cost 1 stone. Later in the game, some better buildings are going to cost more stone. But anyway, you would pay the stone and you would put the guy on it. Any squares, as usual, you would resolve immediately. So if you went here, you would immediately gain 1 stability, but you do not gain the circles till the production phase of the turn. It's also important to note you can have any number of workers on any given card, but they can only be on blue or red. You can't put them on colonies or wonders or anything like that. But you can only play 1 per turn, so even though I can play the next turn on the same space again and then my next turn on the same space again, I cannot put 3 of them on in 1 turn, for instance. Also, at any point during my own turn, I can undeploy any number of them. It's not an action to undeploy somebody, but then I'm going to have to pay stone to put them back on a different area. The third possible action you can do in a turn is to hire an architect, and you always hire them to fill on wonders you have under construction. They always go from left to right. So for instance, we see here the cost of the leftmost space is 2 stone. So if I wanted to put him here, I would pay 2 stone, and he's now built that area. You can't hire an architect if you don't have the stone or if you don't have a wonder under construction or anything like that. And they are limited every turn to the amount in this area. When all the architect spaces on a wonder are completed, so let's just pretend he filled the second space because we already had one in the first, it would immediately go down to your wonder area and you now have that effect in the game. So for instance, we would immediately move up 2 stability because that is a square. Also, as with anything else, the number of wonder spaces are limited, so if you were full, you would have had to have removed 1 at that time. If you cannot or do not want to take one of the 3 actions in your turn, you pass. Once you've passed, you cannot redo any actions this turn. You're totally out until everybody is passed. Once everybody's passed, we move on to the resolution phase, which is composed of 5 parts. Those 5 parts are production, player order, war, events, and famine. During production, all players are going to produce simultaneously. That's the pluses and minuses they have. So for instance, let's pretend this guy was here in these spaces like so, and he had taken 2 guys from over here. We can see that he won't make any stability because that's a square. He won't make any military because that's a square. He's already gained or lost those earlier in the game. But he'll make 1 money, 2 food, 2 stone, but then he's going to lose 1 food plus 3 food plus 3 more, so that's 7 food, but he's only made 2, so he's got -5 food production. So he's going to have to pay 5 food. he only has 3. So what happens when you can't pay enough is you're going to pay all you can of that type. You lose a victory point, then you have to pay the balance in books. If you ever run out of books and you have to continue paying, you lose another victory point, then you would pay with another resource. And again, if you run out of that, you lose another victory point, and so on. But you must pay everything that you can. It's possible to lose 4 victory points a turn, 1 for food, stone, gold, and books being out when you need to pay them. Also, during production, anybody with negative stability loses 1 book per negative. So in this case, they would lose 3 books. And again, in our example, they would lose the 2. They would lose a VP for not having enough books, and they'd have to pay with another resource. But you also lose 1 VP regardless of how negative you are. So in our case, he would lose 3. Let's pretend he was up here. Then he still loses 1 VP for not having any stability. Next is player order, and that's redone in order of military strength. So if this guy's at 15 and this guy's at 6, he would stay first. This guy would stay second. If there was more players, it's always done in order of military strength. If there's a tie, the tie is broken by stability. And if they're still tied, they're just going to stay in the same order that they were the previous turn. After that, if there's a war, it'll resolve at this time. Remember, we had this out at 5 earlier, so let's pretend this guy is at 2, even though he bought it, and this guy is at 10. So what happens when the war resolves is anybody below this amount, it's okay to be tied with it, is going to suffer the penalty. The penalty is always 1 victory point, and you cannot avoid that, and then there will be some type of resource penalty at the bottom. However, you pay 1 less resource for every stability you have. So if this guy had 3 stability, he would normally have to pay 5. He would only pay 2 gold. And like all other points in the game, if you can't pay the thing, you're going to have to pay the balance with books, and you're going to lose a victory point. But you can't continue to lose victory points for the same item that turn. So for instance, if this costed gold and you already had no gold and lost a VP from the production part of the turn, you wouldn't lose another VP. But if you ran out of books paying for it, you didn't already run out of books earlier this turn, you could lose a VP for that, and so on. So you're limited to maximum 4 VP loss there per turn. But you do have to pay everything you can, and you can lose a lot of points by not doing so. Next, you're going to resolve both events in the event card in order from top to bottom. You can see here whoever has the most military gets 1 victory point. In this game, if you have the most, you have to be alone at the most. So for instance, both of these guys here would have the most at 6, but since they're tied, nobody gets a benefit for the most. You have to be alone most to have the most. However, if something penalizes the lowest, all tied players for the lowest would count as the lowest. Also, I want to point out that if this guy has -5 stability, this guy has -1, they would be considered tied for the least stability. Any negative stability counts as having the same. But anyway, most stability here would get another thing. Some of the cards are going to give players a choice. If they have a choice, they're going to make their choice in reverse play order, but it's going to resolve at the same time. So for instance, some of the cards might say things like pay money or be last in turn order. So first green would decide, okay, I'm going to pay money, and then red would decide, okay, I'm going to be last in turn order. So they would switch like that. But if both decided to be last in turn order, green would still stay last because it's going to resolve at the same time. And the final step of the resolution phase is to pay the famine. Every event card has a famine value on it here. It costs 2 food, so everybody has to pay 2 food, following the same rules for losing resources as all other parts of the game. So if you've already lost your victory point for not paying food and you're out of it, you won't lose another point for food, but you're still going to have to pay some other things. Those 3 phases, maintenance, action, and resolution, happen every turn, but every second turn, you're also going to have a scoring phase. And during the scoring phase, players are going to get 1 victory point. For each player, they have more books than. So let's pretend green has 17 books and red has 6. Green has more books than 1 player, so green is going to get 1 victory point. Red has more books than nobody, so he's going to get 0. So 2-player, there's not a lot of points awarded here, but if there was another player, up here in a 3-player game, he would get 2 books, green would get 1, and red would get 0. And so on. So that's how the scoring phases work. And at the end of the game, after the 4th scoring phase, there's going to be a final scoring. And during final scoring, players are going to get points that you can record on a score pad for all the different things they've come across during the game. Every victory point, of course, is worth 1 point. They're also going to get points as indicated on their colonies. You can see here these low-level age 1 colonies are actually worth 0, but later on in the game there's going to be some colonies that are worth points. They're also going to get points for completed wonders. We can see here this one is worth 1 point if it's completed, but later on in the game, of course, they can be worth more than that. The next set of points would come from buildings and military, and you can see here the first guy you place on this is worth 1 point, or the leftmost value, and the second guy would also be worth 1. If you place 3, 4, 5 guys on this one, you're not going to get any extra points, but later on in the game you can see some that might be worth different values, like the first guy you place could be even as much as 3, or things like that. And then finally you're going to add up all your resources, and when I say resources, I'm saying gold, stone, food, books, military and stability. Make sure you count books, military, and stability because some people forget them. Then you're going to divide by 10 and you're going to get points for that too. At that point, whoever has the most points is going to be the winner. Let's get going with this example playthrough. The first part is the round marker. Of course, that's already where it's supposed to be, so nothing's going to happen there. And the progress cards are already where they're supposed to be because it's the first round of the game. But normally we would clear them out a little bit. Next is growth, so that's going to happen in reverse player order. So green is first going to decide if he wants to increase his population or to get some resources. Green decides he'd actually like to get 4 gold. Remember, you pick one of these and this dictates the amount. So he's going to take 4 gold from the supply and add it to his area. The red player decides he'd like to take a bunch of food, so he's going to take 4 food at this time. So he's just going to add that to his play area. And then after that, we're going to proceed with the new event card. So we're going to flip it. Both players are going to get to see the famine value. And then we're going to add architects. It's a 2-player game, so we're always going to add 1. And this event card adds 0 itself, so we're not going to add any more for that. So we move on to the action phase. We know the red player is going to go first, so he's going to take the first action of the round. For his first action, he decides to spend $2 because it's this row that he's looking at. He wants this archer here. So he spends the 2, he gets 1 back, and he's going to put this on any of these cards that he'd like. He does not want axemen, he decides, so he's going to cover up those axemen with that archer. So now it's the green player's turn. He decides he wants to be a bit more economic, so he's going to spend 1 gold, and he's going to take this Confucian Academy here. He decides he's going to cover up the caravan because it's just slightly better than the caravan is. From there, it's back to the red player. He decides he's going to spend 1 stone because that's the cost of building an archer to deploy 1 guy here. So this is red in a square, so he's immediately going to gain 2 military at that time. And then it's going to go back to the green player who's going to take a turn as well. He isn't super excited about it, but he's going to spend 1 gold to buy that war. Now, because his military value is at 0, this war is going to come in and it's going to be a strength of 0. Now, nobody can actually lose anything to a war at strength 0. So at the red player's turn, he decides he's going to spend a money to get this battle here. And his raid value is actually 4 because that's the value of the archer, and he has 1 guy on it. Remember, more guys would not increase that raid value, so he's going to pick books, food, or stone, and he decides he's going to take 4 food at this time. He's hoarding up a lot of this, and this just goes away. This battle is complete. For the green player's turn, he decides he's going to spend 1 of these, and he's going to get 2 stone from this card here. He could have spent a resource to get a point or get 2 stone. He's taken the 2 stone. With that, we're going to jump ahead to the resolution phase. Welcome back. The red player has just passed, so we can take no more actions. Green still has 1 more guy left that he'd definitely like to deploy somewhere. He decides he might as well deploy him to the forge, so he's going to spend 1 more stone, put a guy in the forge. He can keep taking actions now since red's out of the game. He's the only player left, but he decides he's also going to pass at this time. With that, we move on to the production phase. So first, let's just do reds. We know he gets 3 stone here, 3 money here, and he has no real costs at this time because there's nothing taking away from him. And he also gets 2 food here. So that's going to be 2 food, 3 stone, 3 money that he just takes from the supply, and green will produce just like that. Then we reassign player order based on military strength. We can see red is the most, so he's going to stay exactly where he is because green has the least. So the war resolves. Anybody at or above 0 military is not going to suffer any effects. So that war doesn't happen. Remember, you take -1 for every stability you have, so this guy would have only had to pay 1 gold, but he would still lost that victory point regardless of how much stability he had. And then we're going to go on to the events. So the person with the most military, which is obviously red because he alone has the most, remember if they're tied, he doesn't have the most, gets 1 victory point. And whoever has the most stability can increase their population and take 3 food. So when you increase your population, he can decide which side he wants to take it from, whether it be the food or the stability side. Right now, he has a lot of stability, so he's just going to take it from the stability side, and he's going to go down immediately because that's a square. So this card is out of the game. Then we're going to go on to the final part of the turn, which is the famine, where you pay based on the event card. So the famine this turn is 2, so everybody's got to pay those 2 resources, and they both have plenty of food, so they're okay. So we move on to the next turn. This goes up to B. I also want to point out after B, in the future, it's going to go over to A, and you're going to start using the 2s for both the event cards and the progress cards. There's also going to be a scoring round at the end of this turn here. These guys are wiped out because they're in the first 2 rows, everything from the third row comes down, and you're just going to refill all the rest of the spaces that you normally use, like so. We'll jump back a little later in the game, closer to the final scoring. Welcome back. We just finished the second round in an age. In this case, it was the B round in the fourth age, so we're going to have a scoring at this time. You get 1 VP for each player. You have more books then. Red has more books than 1 player, and green has more books than no player, so red gets 1 VP at this time. It also happens to be the last round of the game, so we're going to move on to final scoring. They give you these score pads. We have Team Game and Team Fondue. This green player will represent Team Game. So the first thing we got to check is how many VP they had. He ended up with 13 VP, so those are just going to translate directly into points. And you do start with some VP, but remember, you can lose them for not being able to pay resources. Colonies, however, he's got none, but we will say this guy over here has 2 points in colonies and 3 points in colonies, because that's the value of the different colonies. Brazil is worth 1 and Australia is worth 2, just demonstrationally, so you can see some points scored there. Wonders, this guy's got a whole lot of points in wonders. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He also gets a bonus 2 here if he has the most people, which clearly he does. He's used all his people. So that's going to be 8 points total in wonders for him. And then buildings and military. Now remember, these are a little bit different based on who you built where. So we see here the first guy built on this area is worth 1, so that's going to be 1 point. We see here that the first guy built is actually worth 2, and each of the next 2 is 1 apiece. However, he's built 5 guys here. He's only going to get the 2, 3, 4 points for it. Plus this 1, we're up to 5. Here we got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 15, 16, 17, 18 is going to be his total for buildings and military. And lastly is resources. And remember, you do include books, stability, and military in here. And I do want to point out military maxes out at 40 because this guy has way more, but he's only going to get to count that as 40. So we got 2 food plus 21 stone, so we're up to 23, 33, 43, 53, 63, 66, plus 3 stability is 69, plus 6 military is 75, plus 34 books is going to be 109. Oh, he just missed it there. So that's going to be 10 points because you do divide by 10. Then you're going to have your total. The other guy's going to total his score. If his is more, he's the winner. If his is less, the green player wins. Holy components, Batman. There's a whole lot of components in this game. The progress decks and things, if you're using the advanced and expert cards, you're not even typically going to get halfway through them. Changes a little bit depending on the player count. But there's a lot of variability there, and there's also, you know, a great deal of randomness in that you don't always know what's going to come. So it's a little bit hard to strategize several turns ahead. But you know, there's certainly strategies that are prevalent across whatever card distributions you're going to get. But that makes the game pretty tactical in nature, but it makes it very different between games. There's an entire 1-player module. I'm not big on solo gaming, so we didn't really cover it in the video, but there's an entire module and a whole bunch of components just for the 1-player game. If you're into that, it's not tacked on. There's a lot of stuff that goes just for that. So there's that too. The game itself, it's a little bit longer of a game. So it's not a game I get to play as much as I'd like, but I always really enjoy playing it. It's nice compared to, you know, Through the Ages or other Civ building games in that the rules are very simple to understand. They're very streamlined. The game itself takes about 40 minutes a player, but it's going to take a lot more, you know, when you're explaining it and things, because there's a lot to understand. But the game, you know, 1 of 3 actions, and you're basically just deploying guys or buying most of the time. Hiring architects is a little more situational. But if it looked neat to you, it's a really neat game. Check it out. That's Nations.